도대체 2시간짜리 내란이라는 것이 있습니까? 질서 유지를 위해 소수의 병력을 잠시 투입한 것이 폭동이란 말입니까?
Let us imagine two individuals, A and B. A is the former Attorney General who had the prosecutors of the country under his arms and is now the current president of the entire country. Then we have B. B is a low-life IRL streamer who essentially goes around the world causing trouble against the locals, all to receive $3 to $5 donations from his live chat. Oh, and the individual gets occasionally punched and kicked by the locals as well. Again, all for $3 donations. Now, when we hear the description for A and B, we would naturally come to think that they probably live two polar opposite type of lives. However, A and B actually have more similarities in their lives than you may think. For one, A and B are both officially travel banned from leaving the country that they're currently in right now by the Ministry of Justice for the potential possibility of escape. For two, A and B both face potential prison time in the upcoming months. For three, A and B are both somewhat isolated and lonely, with quite literally almost no one on their side to support them. And remember how we first said let us imagine, right? Well, it turns out that we do not even really have to do much imagining at all, as A and B both physically exist in real life, currently only a few hundred kilometers away from each other on South Korean soil. A is the current president of South Korea, Yoon Suk Yeol. B is the world's most hated IL streamer, Johnny Somali, or Ramzi Khalid Ismail. Now, it is most likely that President Yoon will not remain a president for much longer. On December 14th, 2024, 204 of the 300 members of the South Korean parliament have voted at the National Assembly to impeach Yoon, leading him to immediately lose his presidential powers. But for now, when referring to Yoon Suk Yeol, we still have to refer to him as President Yoon from the technical sense. This is as the decision to impeach Yoon has to still be reviewed by the Constitutional Court of South Korea, with the impeachment trial scheduled to be held within the next 180 days. And when the Constitutional Court upholds the parliament's decision for impeachment, that will be the day when Yoon will be formally removed from office. So right now, you can think of President Yoon as kind of like the King of England. He still has that president title over his head, but in reality, holds absolutely no practical presidential powers, or has any presidential duties handed to him. But now, how did all of this happen to President Yoon? How did he go from the candidate that the citizens of South Korea voted for to be the country's next president just a few hundred days ago, to a president with one of the lowest approval ratings in the history of the country, only to end his term in a rather humiliating fashion of being impeached? What kind of life did he lead in order for him to ultimately end up in this predicament? And most of all, what kind of takeaway lessons can we get from the story of his life? Let us find out in today's video. The life story of President Yoon is not exactly a started from the bottom, now we're here type story. He was born from a prominent family, with his father being Professor Emeritus and founding member of the Department of Applied Statistics at Yonsei University, which is one of the most, or some may argue as the most prestigious private university in all of South Korea. Regarding politics, the younger brother of his grandfather was a former mayor of Seoul, and his genealogy is so clear in the South Korean history, in fact, that the earliest historically confirmed ancestor of his lineage, Yoon Shin-dal, was born all the way back in the 800s. Now, after graduating from Chungham High School in 1979, it is said that Yoon initially wanted to become a psychologist. However, listening to the advice of his father, he ultimately decided to study law at Seoul National University, the highest-ranked university in all of South Korea. He was exempt from mandatory military service that all men from South Korea have to attend due to bad eyesight, and successfully graduated with a bachelor's degree in law from Seoul National University in 1983, then with a master's degree in law, also from Seoul National University 5 years later in 1988. However, there was one thing that was blocking Yoon from practicing law in South Korea: passing the national bar exam. Yoon unfortunately failed to pass the bar exam for almost a decade. According to the Chunghang, the primary reason for Yoon's lack of success with the bar exam was because he enjoyed meeting people and attending drinking gatherings, which most likely led to a decrease in his study time. And according to Naeronambul, a former judge and current member of the South Korean National Assembly, who also studied law at Seoul National University, University, stated that in the study group of Seoul National University law students studying for the National Bar exam, Yoon was basically the boss of the study group.
10여 명 정도 저희 학교 친구들 같이 공부했었고 그때 제일 대장이 우리 후보님이셨죠.
Please keep in mind that she used the word 대장, which more accurately translates to the English word boss, rather than the word leader, as this point becomes more important as we progress on with the video. And this essentially foreshadows the life of Yoon for years to come. But with that said, Yoon finally passed the National Bar exam on his 9th try in 1991, and with that, officially entered into his phase of life as a prosecutor of South Korea. Now, we have to keep in mind that Yoon spent most of his professional life as a prosecutor, meaning that if we are to get into the details of his life story as a prosecutor and mention all of the important cases that he handled, this video would have to be more than 3 hours long. But if we are to summarize the almost 3 decades of career that President Yoon had as a prosecutor, it would be one word: fear. If a person was a criminal and Yoon got hold of his or her case and decided to prosecute, then that individual was fundamentally and royally screwed. Throughout his time as a prosecutor, his nickname in Korean was literally a one of 칼잡이 검사, or the prosecutor with the knife, largely thanks to how when he put his mind to investigate and prosecute an individual, he usually got this done regardless of whoever it was, and sent them to prison. Of course, in hindsight, the one with the knife nickname sounds extremely ominous, with us knowing what he later committed as the president. But back then, the one with the knife nickname largely had a positive connotation, as many people believed Yoon to be the prosecutor who did not fear anybody he was facing against, as long as it was for the sake of upholding justice. After starting his life as a prosecutor in 1994 at the Daegu District Prosecutor's Office, he gradually got promoted into higher positions of power, eventually being called up to the capital city during the period of the Kim Dae-jung administration to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. Then he immediately got to work, summoning and investigating Park Hee-won on bribery charges. It is said that although Park Hee-won initially denied all of the charges, he completely changed his mind after one day of Yoon's investigation, leading him to conduct a full confession. Again, in just one day. Park Hee-won was later sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison on charges of bribery. Some of his notable arrests during his time as a prosecutor was the arrest of Chung Mong-gu, the former chairman of Hyundai Motors, on slush fund charges in 2006, as well as the arrest of Lee Jae-yong, the current executive chairman of Samsung Electronics, or the richest person in South Korea in 2017 on bribery charges. So again, he did not care if the person in front of him was a chaebol or even the wealthiest person in South Korea. If he decided to raise his prosecutorial knife, then you know, his target on the opposite side might as well just start googling how life was like in a South Korean prison if they have not already visited there before. By this point, we all know that Yoon has established himself a reputation over the decades of a one in the lines of a prosecutorial honey badger, not fearing or giving a care about whom he's investigating against, as long as he believed it was the right thing to do. But then, you'd think that even he still has a limit, right? Sure, he'll investigate against the chaebol, as after all, they do possess most of the wealth in South Korea, but there's still no president of the country with overarching political authority. However, that statement is still underestimating how much of a prosecutorial honey badger President Yoon was back in his prosecutor days, because as it turns out, during his time as a prosecutor, he did investigate against the ruling presidential administration not once, but twice, while they were still in power. In December 2012, Park Geun-hye was elected as the 11th president of the Republic of Korea by the South Korean people. However, just a few months after her election victory, controversy regarding her election win arose, as it was confirmed by a whistleblower who was a former employee of South Korea's National Intelligence Service that the NIS manipulated public opinion by actively controlling the comments on various major South Korean online platforms in favor of Park Geun-hye and her party prior to the elections, aiding in her presidential victory. And guess who became the team leader of the Special Investigation Team for this NIS public opinion manipulation case on April 18th, 2013? Yes, Yoon Suk Yeol. Now, many initially believed that this investigation against the newly appointed Park Geun-hye administration was not going to be conducted very actively by the prosecutors, and such speculations were made with valid reasons. Fair enough if the Park administration was already 4 years into the term and only had 1 year left in office, but this was literally quite the opposite. Park Geun-hye officially took office on February 25th, 2013, just over a month prior to when Yoon became the team leader of the Special Investigation Team and was at one of the highest points of her public approval rating. So from a career sense, attacking the president the wrong way when she just took office and had 5 years left of her term was something that many prosecutors were afraid to do. But Yoon don't care. He conducted a very active investigation that included a search and seizure of the very headquarters of South Korea's National Intelligence Service and aggressively arrested and interrogated several NIS agents. However, we still have to keep in mind that in the South Korean legal hierarchy, there were people who are above Yoon from an authority perspective, and such is the Attorney General of South Korea, and of course, the very Minister of Justice of South Korea. And during the NIS public opinion manipulation case, Yoon publicly expressed his discontent against the Minister of Justice of South Korea at the time, Hwang Kyo-an, for exercising unjust level of authority on the investigation with external pressure, making it hard for him to investigate into this case properly. Yoon even stated later during the state audit that his superior came to him and directly chastised him by saying, "Do you want to help out the opposing party?" Now, this type of interference by the Minister of Justice against Yoon in his NIS investigation, as unjust as it is, was unfortunately unsurprising, as the Minister of Justice in South Korea is appointed by the very president her or himself, meaning that Hwang Kyo-an was appointed by President Park herself. So although Yoon asked the judge to sentence Won-seun, then the director of the National Intelligence Service of South Korea, to 4 years in prison and a 4-year suspension of his license for charges of violation of the Public Official Elections Act and the National Intelligence Service Act, the judge gave the director of the NIS a more lenient sentencing of 2 years and 6 months in prison, along with a 4-year probation and a 3-year license suspension. This means that the director of the NIS did not actually serve any real prison time, a verdict that Yoon was not looking for. And after the state audit where Yoon publicly denounced the Minister of Justice, he was given a 1-month suspension of his prosecutor's license and was demoted by being sent away further from the capital city to the Daegu prosecutor's office. So was this the end for Yoon's career? After decades of moving himself up the South Korean prosecutorial ladder to ultimately be ostracized and be sent to a prosecutor's office far away from the capital city for attacking authority that was too big for him to handle? Well, this did seem to be the case until December 1st, 2016. Now, ever since Yoon conducted his investigation against the NIS for violation of the Public Official Elections Act back in 2013, which was at the very beginning phase of the Park Geun-hye administration, to more than 3 years later in December 2016, the South Korean public opinion towards President Park changed 180 degrees. As many of our audience watching this video right now may already know, President Park was involved in one of the largest and strangest political scandals in South Korean political history in 2016, leading the members of the National Assembly to vote to impeach President Park on December 9th, 2016. However, there was still one step left to finalize President Park's removal from office, and that was for the 8 judges at the Constitutional Court of South Korea to accept her impeachment. Hence, with President Park's impeachment trial due in a few months, it was vital for the South Korean prosecutors to make sure that they can find as much proof as possible against President Park from December 2016 until the date of the impeachment trial to sufficiently prove her manipulation of state affairs, in order for the Constitutional Court of South Korea to find this as enough evidence to uphold the National Assembly's decision to impeach President Park. So in this special team of prosecutors, guess who came back into the scene of national attention? Yoon Suk Yeol. He was once again appointed as the team leader of Division 4, which were a team of prosecutors who were specifically put together to investigate the bribery charges that were involved with President Park, Choi Soon-sil, and the chaebol conglomerates of South Korea. As we all know by now, Yoon does not care if he's investigating the wealthiest chaebol in South Korea. His team investigated the case to the most extreme level of thoroughness, and just over a month later after he was appointed as the team leader of Division 4, he successfully arrested Lee Jae-yong, then vice chairman and now the chairman of Samsung Electronics on bribery charges and ultimately sent him to 2 years and 6 months in prison without probation. And with Yoon's work in proving beyond doubt of the manipulation of state affairs of President Park on the bribery end by literally arresting the richest person in South Korea in relation to bribing the administration, the Constitutional Court of South Korea upheld the National Assembly's decision to remove President Park from office on March 10, 2017. And less than 2 weeks after her official removal from office, she began to be investigated by the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office as a suspect of various crimes and was formally arrested on March 31, 2017. She was overall sentenced to 22 years in prison, but was eventually pardoned by the president 4 years later on December 31, 2021. After successfully leading the investigation against President Park, which heavily contributed towards her impeachment, Yoon was given rapid promotion after promotion by the new President Moon Jae-in. On May 19, 2017, Yoon was appointed by President Moon himself as the new chief prosecutor of the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. Then 2 years later, on July 25, 2019, he was once again appointed by President Moon himself as the very next Attorney General of South Korea. So with this, Yoon has now officially reached the highest position that he can get to as a prosecutor in South Korea. And during the Attorney General appointment ceremony, President Moon specifically asked Yoon to strictly investigate any type of corruption if he ever sees it, even if it was against the current ruling party or even against his own presidential administration.
똑같은 자세가 돼야 한다고 생각하기 때문입니다. 우리 청와대든 또는 정부든 또는 집권 여당이든.
But now, although President Moon on the outside told Yoon to investigate any type of corruption, even if it is against the ruling party or the current administration, he probably didn't really mean it. I mean, what kind of president would want the Attorney General of the country, whom the president him or herself appointed, with their very own two hands by handing over the letter of appointment, conducting a full-fledged criminal investigation against them, right? So something that President Moon probably just said out of courtesy. And we have to keep in mind that Yoon at this point was a prosecutor who was absolutely loved by the ruling party at the time, the Democratic Party of South Korea. As after all, whenever Yoon decided to prosecute a politician over the decades, including President Park, it was almost always until this point a member of the opposing party, rarely a member of the Democratic Party. So most of the members of the ruling Democratic Party welcomed Yoon's appointment as the Attorney General, believing that as history has shown that his political prosecutions were always against the opposing party, he was, basically, on their side. But then at this point, you guys know that President Moon and the Democratic Party were gravely mistaken to think in this way. Yoon is a literal prosecutorial honey badger. He does not give a single care if the person he's prosecuting is from the Democratic Party or the People Power Party. He does not care. So as soon as Yoon was appointed Attorney General by President Moon, he took the president's perfunctory request of do not be afraid to investigate against the ruling party or even the current administration quite literally and began investigating Jo-guk, the very individual whom President Moon appointed as the new Minister of Justice of South Korea. In Yoon's inaugural ceremony as the new Attorney General, you can actually see Jo-guk on the bottom left congratulating him. The accusations against Jo-guk were ones such as allegations of preferential university admissions for his daughter Jo-min, as well as a number of other academia-related frauds and preferential treatment of his daughter, controversy over his family's private equity fund, etc., etc. And we all know at this point of what usually happens when Yoon decides to prosecute. Hence, Jo-guk, although appointed as the Minister of Justice of South Korea by President Moon on September 9, 2019, could not keep his position due to all of the controversy and investigation that was going on around him and his family by the Attorney General Yoon, and resigned from his Minister of Justice position just over a month later on October 14, 2019. And Yoon continued to aggressively investigate against the Moon administration throughout his time as Attorney General, which led to increasing conflict between Yoon and the Moon administration, as well as the ruling Democratic Party. Then on November 24, 2020, Yoon was given a 2-month disciplinary suspension from his Attorney General position by the then Minister of Justice, Jumye, for 3 reasons: illegal surveillance of judges on major court cases, obstruction of investigation of Channel A media case, making political remarks that violated political neutrality during state audit. And although Yoon appealed against the suspension and returned to his Attorney General position, suspension, as the court accepted his appeal. Just 3 months later, after his suspension, on March 4th, 2021, he officially announced his resignation from his role as the Attorney General of South Korea. However, on June 29th, 2021, he declared his candidacy for the next presidential election that was to be held on March 9th, 2022. And with popular opinion of Yoon still being largely positive at that point, he was elected as the People Power Party's presidential candidate and went on to win the presidential election on March 9th, 2022 against the Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung. And with that, the once prosecutor with the knife, Yoon Suk Yeol, has now become the president with the knife. So then, what exactly happened to President Yoon? How did he exactly go from the president that the South Korean people voted for to a president with one of the lowest public approval ratings in South Korean political history, all just in a matter of a few hundred days? Now, there is a lot of debate and theory between the South Korean people regarding which reason was the largest contributor to his downfall. However, if we are to really broadly narrow it down to 3 reasons, they would most likely be controversy regarding his wife, First Lady Kim Gun-hee, largely perceived incompetency as a president and unjust, allegedly illegal practices conducted during presidency, and of course, his declaration of martial law, which was essentially the final nail in the coffin when it came to his chances of remaining as the president. Now, we only stated these 3 reasons, as if we begin to talk about theories, arguments, or allegations that are against Yoon, they'll be literally endless. First, if you are to ask any South Korean on what the biggest controversy regarding President Yoon is, 9 times out of 10, they will state that it is the controversies regarding his wife. This has become such a large issue in South Korea, in fact, that when the members of the South Korean National Assembly were voting to impeach Yoon on December 7th, 2024, the first thing that the members of the assembly did, even before conducting the impeachment vote, was to first vote on passing the Kim Gun-hee 특검법, which is a special investigation bill aimed to properly investigate the First Lady for her alleged involvement in several crimes, such as her stock price manipulation scandal. And talking about some of his failures made as the president of South Korea, there are just a lot that can be mentioned on all sides in the economic sector, regarding international diplomacy, in the national defense sector. Again, the list is quite endless. But if we are to really encapsulate the overarching reason why he lost so much public approval during his time as the president, it can be summarized into the following: hypocrisy and double standard. Prior to becoming the president, Yoon always criticized the opposing party, the Democratic Party of Korea, which was the ruling party of South Korea at the time, for forming, to quote, a huge cartel. Yes, he did literally use the word cartel directly in Korean, karutel, and how the Moon presidential administration was formed through personal connections and people with vested interests. However, when he became president, one of the first things that he did was to practice the type of cronyism that he himself stated that he detested so much, by putting in former prosecutors and other connections that he had formed back in his prosecutor days into ministerial and presidential staff positions. And as of March 2023, there were 136 former prosecutors working in the Yoon presidential administration, with 13 former prosecutors in the very vice minister and minister positions. And the South Korean people are not stupid. People saw this right away, with many bravely stepping up and calling this out. In July 2023, Professor Kim Min-kwon from Kyunghee University directly criticized President Yoon by saying that although Yoon always rebuked various groups in South Korea by describing them as karutel or cartels, he himself has essentially formed a prosecutor cartel government. During his presidential campaign, Yoon literally said, to quote, I believe that there should be no exceptions in investigations, trials, or application of the law, regardless of position or status, including my family and relatives, and how those who stand before the people as elected public officials should be subject to unlimited verification of their abilities and morality. And when it came to other electoral candidates, he very much kept to his word. As we have already mentioned previously in our video, when Cho-guk got chosen as the next candidate to become the Minister of Justice of South Korea, Yoon kept to this belief by investigating his family to utmost thoroughness, and ultimately proved the academic fraud related to his daughter, Cho-min, which led her to receive the appropriate punishment by being cancelled of her medical school acceptance, as well as being cancelled of her bachelor's degree as well. And with all of this, Cho-guk stepped down as the Minister of Justice. But just for this incident itself, can we really blame Yoon? No. If Cho-guk did use his powerful influence and committed academic fraud to have his daughter be admitted to medical school before more competent, deserving candidates, then he absolutely does deserve to be punished. There are so many students who are studying day and night, coming from ordinary family backgrounds, working hard to have their dreams be realized, and such unfair admission of his daughter to medical school should not be tolerated. But do you know what other family member of an elected official in South Korea is highly culpable of conducting serious academic fraud? President Yoon's very wife, or the First Lady of South Korea. It has essentially been proven beyond doubt that a large portion of the First Lady's doctoral dissertation has been plagiarized. When tested with the plagiarism detection program, Copy Killer, the overall plagiarism rate over a doctoral paper was at 43%. And if you look at certain sections of the dissertation, the plagiarism rate literally goes up all the way to as high as 87.8%. I mean, Copy Killer was used for official purposes, but anyone with two eyes can tell that her paper is plagiarized due to how she copied and pasted, oftentimes entire articles or blog posts online, and did not even care to paraphrase. And this was not for some type of high school paper. Although even if you conduct this in any ordinary high school, you'll most likely still be suspended or punished. But a literal doctoral dissertation, any of you guys, including myself, who have a close family member who went through the PhD process, will not be able to refrain yourself from boiling over this. The majority of doctoral candidates literally spend multiple years squeezing their brains out, fight through depression, just go through absolute hell in order to be able to get their doctoral degrees. But then, here is the First Lady being able to be called a doctor in the land of South Korea by conducting Control+V on a few online articles and blog posts here and there. But then, every time an investigation was on its way against the First Lady Kim Gun-hee, it was always immediately shut down by the then Attorney General Yoon, or later, President Yoon. And there are just so much more legal matters regarding the First Lady where she evaded prosecution. But we believe you guys essentially get the idea of why the South Korean people are so upset with the First Lady at this point, and President Yoon's more than conspicuous double standard on his personal selection of who deserves prosecution and jail time and who does not, and just exactly why, even before the National Assembly conducted their votes on the impeachment of President Yoon, they first of all voted for the passing of the Special Investigation Bill against the First Lady Kim Gun-hee. So with Yoon rapidly losing public approval by the day throughout his time as president, the opposition party of President Yoon's People Power Party had a landslide victory in the 22nd South Korean National Assembly election held on April 10th, 2024. This was statistically the worst general election defeat of the ruling party in modern South Korean political history, and structurally made it even more impossible for President Yoon to pass any type of policy that he wanted to get through, such as his proposal on the national budget. Now, there are myriad theories and conspiracies regarding just exactly why President Yoon went on to declare martial law, but we believe right now is not the time to speak, as there will be eventual investigations conducted onto Yoon himself, and more accurate reasons will come out then. But for now, the public consensus is that President Yoon most likely declared martial law as a final resort to get at least some sort of grip back on power. But of course, we all know that the very opposite of getting his grip back on power turned out to be the case, as his public approval rating went all the way down to a record low of 11%, had him be barred from leaving South Korea by the Ministry of Justice as a potential flight risk, and is now waiting for his impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court in the next 180 days. When looking back at the life of President Yoon, we believe there are mainly 3 takeaway points that we can learn from his life. First is the danger of holding and practicing prominent double standard in our lives. In Korean, there's a term called 내로남불, which means when I do it, it is romance. When you do it, it is infidelity. And we all know such type of people in our lives. When some other person is caught with a certain criminal or an unethical act, these people are the first to rebuke them or take action to make very sure that they are appropriately punished. But when they are caught with committing the same kind of act, then now all of a sudden, they say it was all for a justifiable cause, and how their actions can be totally legitimized. This essentially summarizes the life of President Yoon. When a certain business has allegations of illegal bribery or corruption, he has to investigate and arrest them under whatever means necessary. Back in 2006, he was so adamant about arresting the chairman of Hyundai Motors at the time, Chung Mong-gu, that he told the Attorney General of South Korea that if he's not allowed to arrest the chairman of Hyundai Motors, he'll resign from his position as a prosecutor. And from this act alone, alone, we have to praise Yoon for standing up for his conviction and his commitment to justice. But then, what if it is his family member or someone who's close to him who's on the other end? What happens when his wife is caught of committing an illegal act of manipulating stock prices or receives bribes? Then he does whatever means necessary, such as exerting external pressure into the investigation using his authority as either the Attorney General or the President to crush that investigation. Yes, we have to praise Yoon for rightfully prosecuting the academic fraud committed by the former Minister of Justice Cho-guk in favor of his daughter, and ultimately succeed in sending him to prison. But what about President Yoon's wife, who has basically been confirmed of plagiarizing the majority of her doctoral thesis? Yes, he absolutely has the right to criticize the previous administration for forming a cartel with people of vested interests. But then, he really cannot form a prosecutor cartel himself by sitting 136 former or current prosecutors, many with few or no political experience, into administrative and ministerial positions of his government. Sure, nobody has a perfectly consistent moral compass, but we still have to have at least some slight degree of consistency in our beliefs and actions, especially if one is literally the president of the country, for one to be able to gain the trust of the people. The second takeaway point from his life is that we have to be acutely cognizant throughout our lives that actions have consequences. You just simply cannot declare martial law and put millions of people in a state of fear and trauma, especially the older generation of South Korea who still have nightmares from the martial law of the 1980s, and act like it didn't mean nothing and how nothing happened. Life simply just does not work that way. Even for Yoon, who usually got his way and got what he wanted throughout his life, all the way up to becoming the president of the country, and talking about getting what you want. If you have watched this documentary thoroughly, you'll know that we still have to give it to Yoon on one thing, that he's a born boss. For fellow MMA fans on our channel, you'll know that line Dana White always says, in the lines of,
throw two guys in a room and who comes out?
Yeah.
Okay? That's the baddest man on the planet. And it is hard to not say that John Jones is that guy right now. When you talk about putting two guys in a room, who comes out? John Jones.
And well, for Yoon, it goes like, if you put Yoon in a room with a group of people, whether it be a study group of prosecutors, any group, Yoon comes out of the room as the boss. And this was essentially his life. When he was a student, a prosecutor, a politician, he has always walked out of the room as the boss. But here's the thing, this only applies when Yoon is with a group of people in the number that can fit into the size of a normal room. When he's with a group of Seoul National University students studying for the bar exam, he'll boss the out of the study group and make sure that they study hard, and make many of them be able to pass the bar. When Yoon is with 6 or 7 other prosecutors, he'll once again boss the living success out of the prosecutors to a victory in whatever legal case that they're handling. But when you're now standing as the president of a nation with 51 million people, you can no longer just be a boss. You have to be a leader. And as good as Yoon may have been as a prosecutor, his methods of bossing around criminals in the interrogation room or his fellow subordinate prosecutors on the team just does not work when leading an entire country, as epitomized by his short-lived attempt to become, as he always has been throughout his entire life, the boss, this time of an entire country, through his sudden declaration of martial law near the midnight hours, and his failed try at becoming a dictator by bringing armed troops to close off the National Assembly. To truly become a leader of a nation, you first have to be accepted by the people, not try to boss them around with armed soldiers. However, this lesson is unfortunately too late for President Yoon, as he has now already been voted by the National Assembly to be impeached, and is just waiting for his formal removal from office, with having no presidential duties handed to him at the moment. But to end our video, you guys remember how Yoon's time as a prosecutor can be best described as that of a prosecutorial honey badger, a prosecutor who's not afraid to face any opponent to get what he thinks is right. Well, that's exactly what's happening right now. Yoon is yet to properly apologize to the South Korean public, actually playing himself as the victim who's suffering from some type of great injustice, giving out a speech where he implied that his declaration of martial law was really not much of a big deal.
결국 병력이 투입된 시간은 한두 시간 정도에 불과합니다. 만일 국회 기능을 마비시키려 했다면 평일이 아닌 주말을 기해서 계엄을 발동했을 것입니다.
But was just something that it did in order to quote, restore constitutional order.
거대 야당의 의회 독재에 맞서 대한민국의 자유민주주의와 헌정 질서를 지키려 했던 것입니다.
And regarding the National Assembly's vote to impeach him, he stated that he'll fight until the end to defend his presidency, and is currently forming an army of lawyers to fight for him until the impeachment trial, and have not yet appeared once to any of the questioning summons called upon by the South Korean prosecutors. Forcefully arresting him will be practically impossible for the time being due to the fact that he's still technically the president living inside the presidential house, with the nation's secret service at his guard at all times. So right as of now, President Yoon is most likely sitting alone at the presidential house, perhaps looking outside the Seoul skyline with a red wine in his hand, having a main character syndrome, and he's thinking of why he and he alone has to suffer so much. And perhaps during his hours of isolated reflection in the presidential house for the next few weeks until the impeachment trial, he'll come to the realization that some of the wrongs that he committed, such as the martial law declaration, has to be properly apologized to the South Korean citizens. But let's be honest, in his mind, he's probably thinking,
Why is he running, Dad?
Because we have to chase him.
Okay, we're going in.
He didn't do anything wrong.
Go,
Because he's the hero Gotham deserves. But not the one it needs right now. So we'll hunt him. Because he can take it. Because he's not our hero. He's a silent guardian. A watchful protector. A dark knight.